I actually don't see myself as an outlier. I see myself as one of many passionate architects who are pursuing this cause, builders as well. And I think that the challenge now, and the thing that I am hopeful that we are getting toward, is the thinking past sustainability. So this pursuit of reversing global warming and finding ways to be more regenerative is kind of the next step up from thinking sustainably.
Welcome to the Earthkeepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earthkeepers community, that includes our spiritual lives. Welcome, friends, to the Earthkeepers podcast. Hey, friends. As you might know, the Earthkeepers podcast is part of a larger organization called Circlewood, and Circlewood has a dream to establish an inspirational, educational eco-village in a place called Camano Island in Washington State. So, in our conversation today, Circlewood's director James Amadon and I are joined by David Vandervort, the architect who has held the vision and designed the built spaces that will make up Circlewood Village. Among other things, we'll talk about green architecture, about listening to the land, and about building in harmony with the nature of place. James, David, it's great to be with you today. I am wondering if, James, as executive director of Circlewood, it would be helpful if you could set the stage for our conversation with David by talking about the vision for Circlewood Village, especially in terms of what's being built there.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. And it's really great to be part of this episode and great to be with you, David. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
As listeners probably know, Circlewood is part of a greater movement of transformation that humanity will need to go through to become more sustainable and more in tune and in balance with the earth. And that is a massive task, often referred to as the great work that lies before us. And we believe that in order to be part of that, we need to create a place for it, a place that helps people see what living in harmony with the earth looks like, a place that people can come and learn about this new way, which is also about rediscovering ancient wisdom and practices, places that are in tune with the local environment, a place that can help this movement go a little bit faster. And to that end, our vision for Circlewood Village is to accelerate the greening of humanity. And to that end, we needed to create an architectural vision that would encapsulate that and inspire. And that's really where David comes in, because David had been working on the land for a long time, and it was in large part his vision for the land and for what could be there that inspired me to say yes to Circlewood. And one of the first things I did as executive director of Circlewood was go to David. I'm sure, David, you remember our coffee meeting in Seattle.
I do.
And say, would you continue on this project? Because you've been the vision, the architectural visionary behind it. And I was so glad that you said yes. And now we're pressing forward with a great vision for the village to be a place of connection, co-learning, collaboration, and truly be a place to accelerate the greening of humanity. David, I mentioned earlier that we had this meeting when I first started Circlewood, and that my goal was to ask you to continue as the architect for Circlewood. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your history before Circlewood, when it was known as Mustard Seed Associate, and what drew you into that organization and kind of your pathway, what was inspiring about that, and why you decided to continue with Circlewood.
I've been privileged to be a part of the organization that was the precursor to Circlewood. And that came about as a result of meeting Tom Sine through actually my church here in Seattle and learning about Tom's passions for a whole life faith and caring for creation and thinking about how to kind of live that in the world and recognizing that as really part of my passion as well. So I became a part of Mustard Seed Associates in the early 90s and was able to become a board member later on. But during that time, I was introduced to the property on Camano Island that Circlewood is now occupying, which is on 40 acres. And this property was a forest, and a beautiful forest in the middle part of the island. This process of dreaming, being on the land, working with my associates to come up with a vision for a retreat and learning center became a part of our practice back in the early 2000s and followed through to this meeting that James and I had in the coffee shop 5 or more years ago now. And so this was a playing out of really my own passions of sustainability, because I felt like this opportunity to design a retreat center for Mustard Seed Associates was a fit to our own goals as a firm and what we had learned about sustainability. The goals of Mustard Seed Associates in their interest in Celtic whole life faith and hospitality and what sustainability and caring for this world was about was a very strong passion for me and allowed me to design a retreat and learning center that was the goal of this property for them in a very sketched vision that James and Forrest, when they took over as Circlewood, this property, were able to dovetail right into with their own interests. So it's been a great treat to then pursue those Circlewood visions with them. And I'm thankful for Mustard Seed, Tom and Christine Sign, and all that they've brought to the inspirations of this, their giving of the land to this endeavor, and to allow a dream to kind of carry forward here throughout these many years.
So, David, I find myself wanting to hear more about your story of transformation and development, specifically as a green architect. Could you point to some of the influence that have shaped your ethos of your work and your values?
I believe I was inspired to the architectural practice through my father, who was a real estate agent and who would bring me to homes that he had open on Sundays, some of which were very entrancing to this kid raised in suburbia and not seeing a lot of unique architectural design. But some of these homes, and one in particular, offered me the opportunity to see how the integration of a building and house, for instance, was able to be integrated into architecture. I remember stepping into a home, walking through the front door and seeing nature in front of me and being confused as to if I was inside or outside that space. And that led me to really understand the strength and the ability that architecture could have to excite and entrance one to appreciate the beauty of creation, appreciate what home means to them. And it led me to a path that took me to the University of Washington. I pursued an architectural degree and then was eventually, after working in 3 or 4 other firms through the 80s, I was able to start my own practice in 1994. And at that time, my true passion was to design thoughtful, creative buildings that would serve people, but also would allow them to appreciate the place that they were in and the beauty of creation that we've been given. So that was the pursuit, and I have followed that now for almost 30 years through my architectural practice. I am eternally grateful for all of those who have been a part of our Vandervort Architects practice, and just glad that this path has led me to the projects that we've been involved with, Circlewood typifying that, but also being a part of projects that were about equality and justice. We were supporting low-income housing, and we were providing nonprofits a place to worship, and even worked with the Native American community at one time on a project for housing.
David, as you talk about your influences, I'm reminded suddenly about how you've influenced me. And this whole idea of buildings that tell a story, buildings that really overtly express values in ways that are easily perceivable, I think that's from you. I mean, that's what I've learned from you, both through designing through Circlewood, but just generally knowing you as a person. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Forrest.
I would just echo that appreciation. I think for me, working with a gifted architect who has this kind of vision and these kind of values has helped shape really what Circlewood is, and really helped me see that how we organize our world, how we construct our built environment really makes a difference with our experience of a particular place. And I can see that being played out in the vision for Circlewood Village. And I also am really impressed with the scope and breadth of the projects that you have taken on that you just described. And I'm wondering if you could highlight one of them for us and go into just a little bit of detail about what made that a different project. What were you trying to do that was maybe trying to open up this perspective to others and inspire others to a different kind of vision for place?
I have been a part of many, so it's difficult to actually choose, but I think of one from a education to sustainability and a collaboratively designed process that really meant a lot to us. And that was a project called Z Home, zero energy being the Z. We were net zero energy and net zero carbon emissions. And it was a project of 10 townhomes where we were tasked with designing a communal space that would be appreciated by those 10 residents, and to design it in such a way that it could be technically very seriously green and even self-supporting, but also a place that would encourage community. So we set about with a number of team contributors to design a project that eventually came to market, I think, as a replicable model for how we might build shared communal spaces and also live off the grid if necessary, but live with zero effect to the energy needs and supported carbon emission reductions. So this project involved interesting ways to create flexible spaces, to have a communal garden and communal spaces that one could work from. It was a certified building from a sustainability standpoint through certification agencies, but it more importantly, I think, has been a success from a community standpoint. And I've had the opportunity to share meals with folks who are residents there and see the appreciation they have for what thoughtfully designed and living off the grid even can be about in living in a townhome project. So that's one example that I think comes to mind that I appreciated more for just the relationships and the community that it built, even more than the net zero, but it was a combination of both of those.
Perhaps you could talk a bit about then the vision for Circlewood Village. What about that place, that space, those designs express your hopes and dreams and values in terms of what it reflects to the world?
Working in a beautiful place in this Pacific Northwest where I've lived all my life is always inspirational. Working to create a place that will inspire innovation and maybe new ways of living and thinking is kind of the ultimate task, at least for me. And I've been gifted to have the folks who have been leadership in this project, back from Tom Sign through Forrest and James here, to be a part of this collaboratively and So Circlewood has been a chance to play out the values that our philosophy of our firm really has stated and is a part of who we are. And I think that could be summed up by the idea of listening to the land and what its found potential, what is out there, what does it have to offer, not taking for granted that we are building a building that we thought about, but to listen first to what the land is saying, and that would be the trees and the beauty of its place. I actually had the chance to be part of a Celtic prayer retreat there for many years before starting in on some of this work more recently, and just being able to listen to the land in a spiritual sense, as well as thinking about it from an architectural sense, has been a great value to me. And the found potential, as I mentioned it earlier, I think is really the trees and the beauty of that place. So one of the things that was begun at the early stages of this development was a forest management plan. James, would you like to talk a little bit about that part of it? That since the trees took a large precedence, understanding that trees and the way to caretake the forest, I think, was an important part.
Yeah, I think that one of the convictions we had before we broke ground on anything, before we even put together a new or updated architectural vision, was learning about the place and learning what it would mean to care for it. So Forrest and I met with some forestry partners who helped us see the forest with new eyes and put together a 30-year, not just a conservation plan in terms of keeping it there, but how to inhabit the place and care for the forest in ways that would enhance its ecological health and help the forest continue to develop, even as we imagine what it would be like to have the built environment within that. And I think that's really helped inform where we place things, where things should go, what the land will allow in terms of the scope of the project, all of those things. So I think hindsight now, 6 years in for me, that was perhaps the most important thing we could do to start. And I think once people come, when we realize this vision, they will see a place that is thoroughly integrated with the forest. I think, David, one of the values that you have in the projects that you've done and that you've brought to Circlewood is that the built environment shouldn't be an imposition on the place. It should be, in a sense, just part of it and feel like it belongs. And in that way, we weren't interested in clearing 40 acres and making everything level so we could put whatever we wanted in there. It's been more about, like you've been talking about, listening to the land, looking at what's there and what will fit, and how our presence there isn't an imposition, but just can be a natural part of the place.
So as we began to think about where to place buildings and how they should be related to the forest, allowing those buildings to have a common nucleus, which we've called the nest, as an internal place of gathering in the forest inside the grouping of buildings that were being designed, but to focus the buildings themselves as an outward focus from that center, to be able to raise up the roof, to view the trees and take full advantage of the forest from almost any space that one is in the village.
David, when we talk about values, I'm reminded of a particular commitment that we as an organization have made to the Living Building Challenge and the standards that that comes with. I wonder if you could tell us about that, because that does, in important ways, shape how we think about what it is that we're building.
The Living Building Challenge is a challenge produced by an organization called the International Living Futures Institute. It is a very serious group of prerequisites that one has to pursue that have been scientifically vetted and kind of holistically brought through a filter that, as an architect of buildings, I've found to be very engaging. The petals of the Living Building Challenge, as they're called, the significant elements that one is looking at involve place, water, energy, waste, stormwater management, health and happiness, materials, food production, forest care, and equity and justice as all parts of this living building challenge. So we've had the opportunity to engage with this organization and to use them as a resource for some of the deeper green aspects that we are pursuing, and to design around a bit of a template, but also one that allows for a lot of creativity for the uniqueness of our project to be brought to it. So it's taken an effort to be a part of the Building Challenge. We've had a engagement with a number of consultants who are part of a design team to think about the mechanical systems of the building and to think about the water use and minimizing that, to think about the possibilities of how we can build without environmentally disastrous chemicals, and to be thinking about resourcing locally. So it's been a broad template of things that have allowed this opportunity for us to participate in the Living Building Challenge alongside just the design of the buildings.
And it is an incredibly exciting vision. And people can go to our website and see what this is going to look like with your architectural drawings. I wake up each morning just wanting to move this vision a little bit faster, and so we can show people what this is going to be in reality. I also know, having been in this process long enough, that it is really, really hard. That what we are trying to do and what you have done throughout your career goes against the grain of how our systems are set up, how materials are procured, how approval processes with local regulatory agencies and counties and state. There's tremendous obstacles to this kind of vision. What are some, from your perspective as an architect, that perhaps are the most challenging at the moment that you hope in the future won't be so difficult?
Yeah, I think a lot of our culture right now and our regulatory agencies have made things difficult, where we have been trying to simplify systems. They have gotten more complex. So it feels like we're pushing up a mountain many times when it comes to looking at ways of making what many years ago Native peoples and other indigenous folks were already doing naturally. And we're trying to bring some of those things back, which seem logical and simple, but sometimes previously set up regulatory issues have been making it very difficult. So I think despite science and facts and intuitions that we've all had, there are challenges to getting things of this nature through just because they don't fit the box of what many projects are built by these days. So we continue to pursue that, and I think we are making gains on it. I just feel like the challenge continues to be there. And I think as a part of this, that the idea of equity and social justice, integrating that into the sustainability conversation, to do all of those things together has been great opportunity, but also continues to be a challenge to find ways to make things more affordable when jurisdictions place more fees and penalties on the process. So as an architect, those are things that we feel that have made our process of getting buildings to market more affordably and more sustainably a challenge.
One of the obstacles that was pointed out by recent guests from Nomadic Earth Architecture was cost. And their point was, if you want to do good, if you want to build better, if you want to build in more earth-friendly ways, you have to expect to pay more money, which is in itself kind of an injustice. But I'm wondering, is that always the case? I mean, is it just a reality that we have to plan on spending more if we want to build well?
Oh, I don't think it's the forever thing. I think that's another evolving thing to our world as architects and builders. We are using so much of the world's resources in this industry, and to be thinking about using less sometimes will equate to affordability. So just trying to build more simply, to be building buildings that are strong and durable and yet do not require many things to cover up other things, that allow structure and the beauty of some of what is the bones of the building, in fact, to become the exposed elements of it. So there is also technology that is making products more affordably these days, some of which are still being vetted, but some of them have come through quite a stringent process. The Forest Stewardship Council has been able to oversee bringing trees that are certified and sustainably grown to the marketplace. And that marketplace is finding new ways to use them in ways that are making better buildings with less materials, less trees.
When you think about prospects for more earth-friendly construction and for more people joining the values movement in terms of what green design and construction represents, are you hopeful that green building could actually become the norm?
I am, and this has been now played out by the number of my cohorts in the industry that I see turning to sustainability as a natural element of their practice. And it's easier now because we have formulas that have been developed over time that can be followed. And so I actually don't see myself as an outlier. I see myself as one of many passionate architects who are pursuing this cause, builders as well. And I think the challenge now, and the thing that I am hopeful that we are getting toward, is the thinking past sustainability. So this pursuit of reversing global warming and finding ways to be more regenerative is kind of the next step up from thinking sustainably.
I have to follow up on that because we talk to folks who talk about regenerative agriculture, for example. And of course, the idea is that as you're growing crops, you're also improving the soil, you're giving back to the land in a way that restores it, makes it more healthy. But I'm trying to get my head around the idea of architecture as being regenerative. Give me an example of what that could look like.
An example of regenerative architecture that I have seen are actually buildings that sequester carbon and projects that plant trees and find ways of producing energy that is giving back to the grid, for instance. So those kinds of things are what play into my thinking of restoration and regeneration. The buildings themselves are healthy to the positive is what I guess I'm referring to.
That's great. I wonder if we might give our listeners a really practical example of this with your design of the forest dwelling units for Circlewood Village. These are going to be just small forest cottages or cabins where people will stay at when they're part of the village. But you have added some design elements that are regenerative in nature that are meant to do as little disturbance as possible. I wonder if you can highlight just 2 or 3 of those design elements for our listeners so they can get a picture of what this might look like in creative architecture.
I believe we have tried to be light on the land. It's part of our mantra as a firm, and it's typified by these buildings because they are only touching the land in 6 or 8 places and not using concrete foundations as one would use typically. So we're actually setting the floor above the ground, and it allows for ground not to be disturbed and allows for water and drainage and runoff to filter through even where the buildings are rather than having to be diverted. So this idea of lifting the buildings above the ground and having minimal integration to it, I think is trying to, again, respect what's there and work with it rather than recreating it into something else. So that's one. And we're using a system of almost a greenhouse glass, which is made up of a polycarbonate instead of glass, that is a sustainable product that is giving one the ability to live in a space that is often placed in the garden. It's a space that is thought of to have much opening and viewing of the outside, and from the outside to take in the sun and use it for energy. So we're using these kind of the greenhouse metaphor in the shape and the actual components of the building, and finding ways to make it self-heating as well as self-cooling by appropriate placement of where the glass or the polycarbonate panels are located. The third element I'd highlight, I guess, is the idea of cross-laminated timber, which is a sustainable product of the future. It's coming onto the marketplace here quickly now because of its thoughtful use of wood. We're using that extensively in these buildings for floor, roof, and wall systems, and they will be also used in the village, the cross-laminated timber panels. So we're using these products that are going to be more predominant elements to the future now, and trying to use them in a way, sort of a kit of parts that will be able to be replicated and used in larger and smaller units that could be placed on the Circlewood land and in other places in the future, possibly around other locales. So we're trying to create a model that is replicable and is as sustainably green as possible.
David, the Earthkeepers podcast has listeners from all over the world and different kind of walks of life. You have focused your work on the Pacific Northwest, but the things that you value and practice are applicable across the globe. What do you hope that our listeners might take away from our conversation wherever they may be listening to this?
I believe that many of the tenets of things we've been talking about apply. I think we all need to find ways, wherever we are, of finding regenerative, restorative, caring ways of using the resources that we have, trying to use them in a way that will reverse global warming. And I think that each of us has that challenge wherever we are. I wanted to suggest that a statement that was created by a mentor for me, one of the founders of sustainability, who is named Bob Berkebile. He stated at one time something that I believe very strongly is something that can be used as an encouragement and as a goal for architects and folks throughout the world. He says it's time to move beyond solutions that are technically acceptable to those that are elegant and inspiring, that touch the heart and elevate the spirit. He says if we want to give our children hope, we must make the things we design and build or rebuild a rite of passage, to give an experience that's so elevating that it opens them up to new potential in their own lives and in their decisions, so that they can become contributing members of a restorative process. To me, that summarizes something that can apply wherever we are in this world.
We've been in conversation with David Vandervort, the architect behind the vision for Circlewood Village. To learn more about Circlewood and about how you can be part of supporting the dream of establishing an eco-village, you can go to circlewood.online to access inspiring visual images of what is being built on Camano Island. To learn more about David and to see photos of the work of Vandervort Architects, you can go to his company's website at vandervort.com or just click on the link in this episode's show notes.